My name is Nicholas, and for the past 10 years, I've been married to Camila. On the surface, we seemed like the kind of couple that had it all together, a beautiful home in the suburbs, 2 thriving careers, and a shared love for travel and quiet weekends. We weren't perfect, but who is? I thought we had the kind of partnership that could withstand the demands of our busy lives. At 37, I work as an architect, a career I love but one that often consumes me with long hours and tight deadlines. Camila, 2 years younger, is a marketing executive whose own job demands frequent late nights and occasional business trips. We used to joke that our shared ambition was the glue that held us together. But somewhere along the way, our careers began to pull us in opposite directions. In recent months, I'd noticed a shift in Camila. She'd become more preoccupied, always glued to her phone or rushing off to meetings with little explanation. When I'd ask her about her day, her answers were vague, often accompanied by a quick change of subject. "It's just work," she'd say with a distracted smile. "You know how it is." I did know how it was, at least, I thought I did. We both had demanding jobs, and I assumed her stress was just a natural part of her workload. I told myself not to read too much into it. After all, Camila and I had been through rough patches before, and we'd always come out stronger. But looking back, I can see that this time was different. It all started with a chance encounter at a coffee shop. I was working remotely that day, a rare break from the office, and decided to set up shop at one of my favorite local spots. The hum of espresso machines and the soft chatter of other patrons created the perfect background noise for me to focus on my designs. I was deep into a project when I caught snippets of a conversation at the table next to mine. 2 women were talking animatedly, their voices low but audible enough to catch my attention. "Did you hear about her?" one of them said, leaning in conspiratorially. "Yeah," the other replied with a smirk. "Married, but she's been sneaking around with that guy from work." Bold, right? I didn't think much of it at first. Gossip like that was common in public spaces, and I wasn't one to eavesdrop. But then one of them mentioned a name that made me freeze: Camila. "Apparently, Camila's been seeing him for months," the first woman said. "It's always during those late-night meetings or trips. I don't know how she gets away with it." My heart stopped. I tried to tell myself it must have been a coincidence. Camila wasn't an uncommon name, and it didn't necessarily mean they were talking about my wife. But as they continued, the details became harder to dismiss. They mentioned her job as a marketing executive, the frequent trips, the long hours. I sat there, paralyzed, as the reality of what they were saying began to sink in. The rest of that day passed in a haze. I packed up my things and left the coffee shop, barely registering the walk back to my car. My mind raced with questions. Were they really talking about Camila? Could it be possible that the woman I'd shared my life with for a decade was hiding something from me? I didn't know what to believe, but one thing was clear: I couldn't ignore this. That conversation had planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't shake, no matter how much I wanted to. And so began the unraveling of the life I thought I knew. After overhearing that conversation in the coffee shop, I couldn't stop replaying it in my mind. Every word felt like a tiny crack in the foundation of my marriage. I wanted to dismiss it as meaningless gossip. After all, people talk. But the more I thought about it, the harder it was to ignore the details that lined up too perfectly with Camila's life. For the first few days, I told myself I was being paranoid. Camila had never given me a real reason to doubt her. But once that seed of suspicion was planted, everything about her behavior seemed to confirm my worst fears. Camila had always been dedicated to her job, but lately, her late nights had become more frequent. She'd leave early in the morning and come home hours after dinner, claiming she'd been stuck in meetings or working on tight deadlines. I wanted to believe her. It's what any reasonable husband would do, but her explanations were starting to feel rehearsed, like she was saying what she thought I wanted to hear. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said one night as she walked through the door, her makeup still flawless despite the long day she'd supposedly had. "The team is really pushing hard for this campaign, and it's been non-stop." I nodded, trying to mask my unease. "No problem. You hungry? I saved you some dinner." "Just a quick bite," she said with a smile. "I'm exhausted." She ate quietly, scrolling through her phone between bites. I couldn't help but notice how protective she'd become of that device, keeping it close, angling the screen away from me, and never leaving it unattended. The next weekend, she told me she had a business trip coming up, a last-minute meeting with a client in another city. "It's only for a couple of days," she said as she packed her suitcase. "I should be back by Monday evening." "Another trip?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, this one's important," she said, not looking up from her packing. "They're a high-profile client, and the team needs me there to close the deal." I nodded, but my gut told me something was off. Her tone was too practiced, too smooth, like she'd said it all before. As I watched her leave, I felt a pang of guilt. I wanted to trust her, to believe that her words were genuine. But the conversation I'd overheard at the coffee shop had created a wedge of doubt that refused to go away. That night, I found myself sitting in the living room, staring at her empty spot on the couch. Memories of our early years together flashed through my mind, our late-night talks, the road trips, the way she used to light up when she talked about her dreams. What had changed? When had we stopped being the team we used to be? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden from me. And if those women in the coffee shop had been right, then I owed it to myself to find out the truth. I wasn't ready to confront her yet, but I knew I needed to start paying attention. The little inconsistencies, the subtle shifts in her behavior, they were all pieces of a puzzle I had no choice but to solve. As the days passed, I started noticing more details about Camila's behavior that I'd previously ignored or written off. Each one seemed small on its own, but together they painted a picture that I couldn't ignore. For one, she was more guarded than ever with her phone. She never left it lying around, even when she was at home. If a notification popped up, she'd glance at it quickly and flip the screen down. When I casually asked who was texting her so late, she'd shrug and say, "Work stuff. You know how it is." But I didn't know how it was. Then there were her business trips. They were becoming so frequent that it was hard to believe her company actually needed her to travel that much. When I'd ask for details, what city she was going to, who she'd be meeting, her answers were vague, almost dismissive. "It's just another client meeting," she said one evening, zipping up her suitcase. "Nothing exciting. I'll call you when I get there." She kissed me on the cheek and left, her tone light, but I couldn't shake the unease that lingered long after she walked out the door. The coffee shop conversation continued to echo in my mind. I couldn't get the women's words out of my head, especially the way they'd spoken so casually about the married woman and her affair. It wasn't just gossip, it was a story they seemed convinced was true. I decided to do some digging. That weekend, while Camila was out running errands, I opened her laptop. It was a desperate move, one I wasn't proud of, but I needed answers. She always logged out of her work email, so there was nothing there. But as I scrolled through her browser history, something caught my eye, a flight booking to a city she hadn't mentioned in her recent trips. The date matched one of her supposed business trips from a month ago. I clicked on the booking confirmation, my heart pounding. It showed a round-trip ticket for 2 passengers. The name of the second traveler was blocked out, but the fact that she hadn't mentioned traveling with anyone made my chest tighten with dread. The next day, I decided to take my search a step further. I checked our shared credit card account, something I'd rarely done in the past since we trusted each other to handle our finances responsibly. Most of the charges were normal: groceries, gas, the occasional dinner out. But then I saw something that made my stomach drop: a charge for a hotel in the same city as the flight. The booking wasn't for a business hotel or a conference center, it was for a boutique hotel known for its romantic atmosphere. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. The women in the coffee shop, the late nights, the guarded phone, the vague explanations, it was all starting to come together, and I hated what it was pointing to. When Camila came home that evening, I watched her closely. She smiled as she put her bags down, kissed me on the cheek, and asked how my day was. She seemed perfectly normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was looking at a stranger. I wanted to confront her, to ask her outright if she was hiding something. But part of me wasn't ready to hear the answer. For now, I decided to keep quiet and keep looking. I needed undeniable proof before I could take the next step. And if what I was beginning to suspect was true, I needed to be prepared for the fallout. The evidence was mounting, and with each new discovery, the pit in my stomach grew deeper. The flight booking, the boutique hotel, the guarded phone, it all painted a picture I didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. Camila was hiding something, and whatever it was, it threatened to shatter the life we'd built together. I spent the next few days in a haze, trying to act normal around her while my mind raced with questions. Every smile, every casual "how was your day," felt like a lie, a mask she wore to keep me from seeing the truth. One evening, while Camila was in the shower, I decided to check her phone. It was a risk. I knew if she caught me, it would spark a confrontation I wasn't ready for, but my need for answers outweighed my fear. Her phone was locked, but the passcode hadn't changed. I opened it with trembling hands and went straight to her messages. At first, everything seemed normal. Most of her conversations were with coworkers or friends, filled with mundane updates and work-related chatter. But then I saw a name I didn't recognize: Evan. The thread was brief, but it told me everything I needed to know. "Can't wait to see you again next weekend. Counting down the days. Last night was amazing. You make everything feel so effortless." My heart sank. This wasn't just casual banter or professional small talk. These were words meant for someone who wasn't her husband. I scrolled further, finding a few more messages that confirmed my worst fears. They'd been meeting for months, often during her business trips. The boutique hotel I'd seen on our credit card statement was mentioned more than once, along with plans to meet again soon. I put the phone down, my hands shaking. It was one thing to suspect, but seeing the proof in black and white was something else entirely. I couldn't breathe. The weight of her betrayal pressed down on my chest, threatening to crush me. 14 years of marriage, gone in an instant. Camila emerged from the bathroom a few minutes later, her hair wrapped in a towel and a relaxed smile on her face. She didn't notice the phone sitting on the counter or the way I avoided her gaze. "Hey," she said, walking over to me. "You okay? You seem quiet." I forced a smile, though it felt like my face might crack under the strain. "Just tired," I said, my voice hollow. She kissed me on the cheek and went to the bedroom to get dressed, completely unaware of what I'd found. As I sat there, staring at the phone, I knew I couldn't keep this inside much longer. The truth was out, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. For now, I needed to figure out how to confront her, and what I was going to do next. The following evening, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Camila had just returned from work, her demeanor cheerful as she set her bag down and slipped off her heels. She walked into the kitchen, chatting about some campaign she'd wrapped up, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I waited until she sat down for dinner, watching her as she poured herself a glass of wine. It was surreal, seeing her so calm, so composed, when I felt like my entire world was on the verge of collapse. "Camila," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. She glanced up, her fork halfway to her mouth. "Yeah. I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me," I said, my heart pounding. Her smile faltered, and she set down her fork. "Of course. What's going on?" I took a deep breath, my hands clenched into fists beneath the table. "Who's Evan?" The color drained from her face. For a moment, she didn't say anything, her eyes darting to the side as if searching for an escape. What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Don't lie to me, Camila," I said, my voice rising. "I saw the messages. I know about the hotel, the flights, everything. So just tell me the truth." Her shoulders slumped, and she looked down at her hands, silent for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I repeated, my anger boiling over. "You've been sneaking around with another man, lying to my face for months, and you're telling me it's not what I think? Then what is it, Camila? Explain it to me." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she reached across the table, but I pulled away. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "It started as work. We were just talking, and then it got complicated." "Complicated?" I said bitterly. "That's your excuse. You were bored, so you decided to blow up our marriage for some guy at work." "It wasn't like that," she insisted, her tears falling freely now. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. I just felt lost. I didn't know how to tell you." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Lost?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "You didn't know how to tell me, so you decided to cheat instead? Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I'm sorry," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I'm so sorry, Nicholas. I know I've ruined everything, and I hate myself for it. Please, just let me explain." I stood up, unable to stay seated any longer. The room felt too small, too suffocating. "Explain," I said, pacing back and forth. "What is there to explain? You lied to me, over and over again. Do you even know what you've done to me?" She tried to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Finally, I stopped pacing and turned to face her, my chest heaving with anger and heartbreak. "I don't even know who you are anymore," I said quietly. "And honestly, I don't think I want to." Her sobs filled the silence as I walked out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I didn't know what the next step would be, but one thing was clear, the woman I'd trusted with my heart had broken it in ways I wasn't sure I could ever repair. The confrontation left a wound in the fabric of our home that nothing could cover. The days that followed were filled with silence, broken only by the occasional sound of Camila crying in the guest room where she had moved after our argument. I avoided her as much as possible, throwing myself into work and staying out late. Anything was better than being in the same house with her, the tension so thick it felt like it could suffocate me. Every time I saw her, the weight of her betrayal hit me all over again. Camila tried to reach out, but her attempts felt hollow. She'd leave me notes on the counter, apologies, pleas for forgiveness, but I couldn't bring myself to read them. One night, she even knocked on my bedroom door. "Nicholas," she said, her voice trembling. "Can we talk? Please." I stayed silent, staring at the ceiling as her words hung in the air. After a few moments, I heard her sigh and walk away. At work, I struggled to focus. My colleagues noticed the change in me, and a few even asked if I was okay. Just going through some personal stuff, I said, brushing them off. But inside, I felt like I was unraveling. Sleep became elusive, and when I did manage to drift off, I'd wake up hours later, my mind racing with thoughts of what Camila had done. I kept replaying the confrontation in my head, dissecting every word, every tear, every excuse. Part of me wanted to believe she was sorry, that she truly regretted her actions. But another part of me couldn't forget the lies she'd told, the months she'd spent hiding the truth from me. One evening, after another long day at work, I came home to find Camila sitting at the kitchen table. She looked exhausted, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Can we talk now?" she asked softly. I hesitated, but something in her voice made me nod. I sat down across from her, keeping my arms crossed as I waited for her to speak. "I don't even know where to start," she said, her voice cracking. "I know I've destroyed your trust, and I don't know if I can ever fix it. But I need you to know that I'm not giving up on us. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Her words were earnest, but I couldn't ignore the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "Do you even understand what you've done to me?" I asked, my voice low. "You didn't just cheat, Camila. You made me question everything, our marriage, our life, everything I thought I knew about you." "I know," she said, tears streaming down her face. "And I hate myself for it. But I love you, Nicholas. I love you, and I don't want to lose you." Her declaration hung in the air, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. Love wasn't enough, not after what she'd done. I stood up, shaking my head. "I need time," I said simply. "Don't expect anything more from me right now." She nodded, her expression a mix of hope and heartbreak. As I walked away, I felt a flicker of doubt. Could I ever forgive her? Did I even want to try? Or was this the beginning of the end for us? I didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was clear, the road ahead was going to be long and uncertain. The days that followed were tentative, like walking on glass. Camila tried to repair the damage in small ways, cooking dinner, cleaning the house, and constantly apologizing. It felt like every gesture was an attempt to prove her remorse, but I couldn't tell if it was genuine or just desperation to save face. I avoided deep conversations with her, opting instead for short, practical exchanges. She would ask, "Do you need anything from the store?" or "How was work?" and I'd answer with one or two words before retreating to my office or going out for a walk. But her persistence didn't waver. One evening, she suggested therapy. "I know you don't want to talk to me, Nicholas," she said cautiously. "But maybe we could talk to someone together. A counselor, or—" "I'll think about it," I interrupted, my tone clipped. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. Part of me longed for the stability we once had, the life we'd built together over 10 years. But another part of me couldn't shake the betrayal, couldn't imagine ever looking at her without seeing the lies. Eventually, I agreed to try therapy, not for her, but to see if there was anything left in our marriage worth salvaging. The first session was uncomfortable. Camila poured out her heart, admitting to everything, her attraction to Evan, the moments that blurred professional boundaries, and the affair that followed. She spoke about feeling neglected, about how our busy schedules had created a chasm between us that she didn't know how to bridge. "It doesn't excuse what I did," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I should have talked to you. I should have told you how I felt. But instead, I took the coward's way out, and I hurt you in ways I can never undo." Her words stung because they were true. We had drifted apart, both of us too preoccupied with our careers to notice the growing distance. But her admission didn't erase the betrayal. The therapist turned to me. "Nicholas, how does that make you feel?" "Angry," I said without hesitation. "Angry that she didn't come to me first. Angry that she threw away everything we built for, what? Some fling. Camila flinched at my words but didn't argue. She simply nodded, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The weeks that followed were an emotional roller coaster. Therapy forced us to confront issues we'd avoided for years, her feelings of invisibility, my tendency to bury myself in work, and the cracks in our communication that had widened into an unbridgeable gap. Camila made a point of being transparent. She deleted Evan's number, blocked him on every platform, and offered to let me check her phone whenever I wanted. She cancelled her work trips and shifted her focus to projects that kept her in the office. For the first time in months, I saw genuine effort. But despite her actions, I couldn't shake the doubt. Every time she left the house, a voice in my head whispered, "What if she's lying again?" Every time her phone buzzed, I wondered who was on the other end. Even the small moments, the way she looked at me, the way she touched my arm, felt tainted by what had happened. I wanted to believe we could move past this, but trust is fragile. And once it's broken, it takes more than words to put the pieces back together. For now, I told myself to take it one day at a time. But deep down, I wasn't sure how many days I had left in me. The weeks following therapy felt like an endless balancing act. Camila was putting in the effort, no doubt about that, being open about her schedule, keeping her phone unlocked, and checking in with me regularly. But even with her visible attempts to rebuild trust, the doubt lingered like a dark cloud. One evening, she came home later than expected, citing a last-minute work meeting. It wasn't supposed to go this long, she explained, setting her bag down. But we had to finalize some campaign details. "I'm sorry." I nodded, forcing myself to accept her explanation, though the old nagging suspicion clawed at the edges of my mind. That night, while she was asleep, I found myself pacing the living room, unable to rest. Her story didn't sit right with me, though I couldn't pinpoint why. I tried to push the thoughts away, telling myself that I was overanalyzing. But eventually, curiosity won out. I picked up her phone from the coffee table, my hands trembling as I unlocked it. At first, everything seemed normal. Her messages were mundane, conversations with coworkers, updates from friends. But then I saw a hidden folder in her photo app labeled "Private." My stomach churned as I opened it. Inside were a series of pictures that made my blood run cold. Photos of her and Evan, smiling, laughing, standing too close for comfort. They weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. The intimacy in those images was undeniable. I scrolled through the folder, each photo more damning than the last. One showed them at what appeared to be a restaurant, leaning in close as if sharing a secret. Another showed them sitting side by side in a hotel room, with a glass of wine in each of their hands. My chest tightened as the realization sank in, despite everything, despite all her promises and efforts, she was still seeing him. The next morning, I confronted her. "Care to explain these?" I asked, holding up her phone with the folder open. Camila's face went pale. "Nicholas, I can explain." "Don't bother," I interrupted, my voice icy. "You swore it was over. You begged for another chance. And the whole time, you were still lying to me." Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't care. "It wasn't like that," she said desperately. "I didn't see him again, I swear. Those photos are old. I couldn't delete them." "Why?" I demanded. "Why couldn't you delete them? Were you keeping them as some kind of trophy? Or was it because you couldn't let him go?" She sobbed, unable to answer. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. "You don't deserve my trust, Camila," I said, my voice breaking. "You've shown me exactly who you are, and I'm done pretending that this is something we can fix." She reached for me, but I stepped back. Please, Nicholas, she pleaded. Don't do this. I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. Love doesn't look like this, I said bitterly. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this, not once, and certainly not twice. I grabbed my jacket and walked out the door, her cries following me as I left. This time, there would be no therapy, no reconciliation. Camila had made her choice, and now I was making mine. Walking away from Camila wasn't easy, but it felt like the only option left. Her betrayal had cut too deep, and the discovery of those photos proved that the trust between us was irreparably broken. I moved out the next day, taking only the essentials and leaving the rest behind. I couldn't bear to sort through our shared belongings, each item a reminder of the life we'd built and the lies she'd woven into it. Filing for divorce was a cold and clinical process, a far cry from the love and warmth that had once defined our relationship. I sat across from my lawyer, answering questions about assets, accounts, and property like I was negotiating a business deal instead of dismantling a marriage. Camila tried to reach out during the proceedings, sending me long emails and tearful voicemails. I know I've ruined everything, one message read. But I still believe in us. Please don't give up on me. I deleted the messages without responding. I didn't have the energy to engage with her anymore. Word of the affair spread quickly, thanks to the tight-knit nature of Camila's workplace and our shared social circles. Friends who once admired her professionalism began to distance themselves, and rumors about her relationship with Evan started to surface at her office. She brought this on herself, a mutual friend said during a phone call. It's sad, but what did she expect? I didn't take any satisfaction in her downfall. If anything, it made the whole situation feel even heavier. Camila wasn't just my wife, she was someone I'd cared for, someone I'd built a life with. Seeing her unravel, even from afar, felt like watching a slow-motion car crash. As for me, I tried to focus on rebuilding my life. I threw myself into work, taking on more projects than ever before to keep my mind occupied. But even as I stayed busy, the weight of what had happened lingered. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake in my small, sparsely furnished apartment, staring at the ceiling and replaying everything in my mind. The coffee shop conversation, the confrontation, the photos, they all haunted me, refusing to let me rest. Friends and family rallied around me, offering their support and encouragement. You're better off without her, they said. You'll get through this. Their words were kind, but they didn't make the pain go away. Losing Camila felt like losing a part of myself, and I wasn't sure how to fill the void she'd left behind. Meanwhile, Camila's life continued to crumble. Mutual friends told me she'd stopped going to work, unable to face the whispers and judgment from her colleagues. Evan had been transferred to another office, leaving her isolated and adrift. She's not doing well, one friend said over coffee. I think she's finally realizing what she's lost. I nodded but said nothing. There was nothing left for me to say. The fallout of her choices had left both of us broken, and though I was trying to move forward, it felt like the past would never truly let go. The weeks following the divorce filing were some of the darkest of my life. I had expected a sense of relief, a feeling that I was finally taking control of my future, but instead, I felt hollow. The anger that had kept me going began to fade, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. Physically, I was falling apart. The stress had taken its toll, sleepless nights, a constant tightness in my chest, and a gnawing fatigue that made even basic tasks feel overwhelming. My friends insisted I see a doctor, and reluctantly, I made an appointment. The diagnosis didn't surprise me, stress-induced health complications. My blood pressure was dangerously high, and the doctor warned that if I didn't make changes, I was risking serious consequences. You need to take this seriously, Nicholas, she said firmly. Your body can't sustain this level of stress for much longer. I nodded, promising to make adjustments, but I had no idea where to start. The pain of Camilla's betrayal weighed on me like a physical burden, and no amount of exercise or relaxation techniques could lift it. Camilla, too, was struggling. Though I kept my distance, mutual friends occasionally updated me on her situation. She'd taken a leave of absence from work and was spending most of her days at home. "She's a mess," one friend told me. "She keeps asking about you, wondering if there's any chance you'll talk to her again." The thought of her sitting alone in that house, our house, filled me with conflicting emotions. Part of me felt a pang of sympathy for her, while another part felt vindicated. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. But sympathy or not, I couldn't bring myself to reach out. My health continued to decline, and soon, the physical toll became impossible to ignore. I started missing work, unable to focus or muster the energy to get through the day. My colleagues, who had been supportive at first, began to worry. "You need to take a break, Nicholas," my boss said during a meeting. "You're burning out, and we can all see it." I nodded, knowing he was right, but the idea of taking time off felt impossible. Work was the only thing keeping me from spiraling completely, even if it was draining what little energy I had left. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. It was sudden and intense, radiating down my arm and leaving me gasping for breath. Panic set in as I realized this wasn't just stress, this was something far worse. I managed to call 911 before collapsing onto the floor. The next thing I knew, I was in a hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines and concerned faces. "You had a mild heart attack," the doctor explained when I woke up. "It's a wake-up call, Nicholas. You can't keep living like this." As I lay there, staring at the sterile white ceiling, a wave of despair washed over me. My marriage was over, my health was failing, and I felt more alone than ever. Camilla reached out again after hearing about my hospitalization, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. Her voice, her presence, it was all too painful, a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. I didn't know how to move forward from this. All I knew was that the life I'd once known was gone, and I wasn't sure if I had the strength to rebuild it. The hospital stay left me physically weakened and emotionally drained. I was discharged with a laundry list of medications and strict instructions to rest, eat better, and avoid stress at all costs. But how do you avoid stress when your entire life feels like it's crumbling? The days blurred together as I recovered at home. Friends visited occasionally, but their words of encouragement felt hollow. "You're going to be okay, Nick," they'd say, their voices filled with forced optimism. I nodded and smiled, but inside, I wasn't so sure. Camilla tried to reach me again, this time through a mutual friend. "She's worried about you," the friend said over the phone. "She heard about the hospital and wants to see you." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse outright, to tell her she had no right to involve herself in my life anymore. But another part, the part that still remembered the good years, the laughter, the love, wanted to hear her out. When she showed up at my door, she looked nothing like the confident, composed woman I'd married. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale, and her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked as broken as I felt. "Nicholas," she began, her voice trembling. "I know I'm the last person you want to see right now, but I couldn't sit by and do nothing. I'm so sorry for everything, for what I did to you, for what it's done to us." I let her in, too tired to argue. We sat in silence for a while before she spoke again. "I never wanted this," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "I never wanted to hurt you. And now, seeing you like this, I don't even know how to make it right." Her words stirred something in me, a mix of anger, sadness, and a flicker of the love that had once held us together. But love wasn't enough to erase the pain. "I appreciate your concern," I said finally, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "But you can't fix this, Camila. You can't undo what's already been done." She nodded, her tears falling silently. "I know," she whispered. "But I want you to know that I'm here, if you ever need anything." I didn't respond. I couldn't. After she left, I sat alone in the quiet apartment, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Her visit had stirred up emotions I wasn't ready to face, and I felt more lost than ever. My health was fragile, my marriage was over, and the future felt like a dark, empty void. I didn't know what the next chapter of my life would look like, or if I even had the strength to turn the page. For now, all I could do was exist in the moment, one breath at a time. Months passed, but the pain remained like a constant shadow. My body began to heal, slowly, but the emotional wounds were far deeper. Some days I felt like I was making progress, rediscovering fragments of myself that I'd lost in the chaos. Other days, the weight of it all threatened to pull me under again. Camila stopped reaching out after a while, respecting the boundaries I had put in place. Mutual friends occasionally mentioned her in passing, saying she was trying to piece her life back together. I didn't ask for details. Knowing she was out there, living with her regrets, was enough. In moments of quiet, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The coffee shop conversation that started it all, the lies and betrayals, the fragile attempts at reconciliation, it felt like a lifetime ago. But the memories still stung, a reminder of how quickly life could unravel. I didn't hate Camila. I wanted to, but the truth was more complicated than that. She had broken my trust, shattered my heart, but she had also been my partner, my confidant, the woman I had loved deeply for a decade. That love didn't disappear overnight, but it had been replaced by something else, an understanding that some wounds can't be healed, and some bridges can't be rebuilt. The life I had before was gone, and I was still learning how to navigate the new one. I spent more time with friends, picked up old hobbies like sketching and hiking, and even started therapy to untangle the mess of emotions inside me. It wasn't easy, and some days it felt impossible. But step by step, I was learning to let go, not just of Camila, but of the anger, the sadness, and the part of me that still clung to the past. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that life doesn't come with guarantees. Love, trust, happiness, they're all fragile, and they can be taken away in an instant. But that doesn't mean they're not worth striving for. This story doesn't have a happy ending. There's no grand reconciliation, no moment of redemption. But there is a kind of peace in knowing that I survived. And sometimes, survival is enough.